Morning, folks. Welcome to the next of our Building Equitable Economies webinar series from California Forward. These webinars on innovations in broadband are co-sponsored by the California Emerging Technology Fund, and we really appreciate everybody being here today. Next slide, Lauren. Hi, I'm Micah, CEO of California Forward, and really glad that you're able to join us. Next slide. All right, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. For the speakers, please keep your mics muted when not speaking. And for everybody who's participating today, we try to get to questions and answers as quickly as we can. That tends to be one of the most exciting parts of these webinars. There's a questions panel on the right side of your screen, and you can enter the questions, and then our moderator for today, who'll be asking the questions, Eduardo Gonzalez, will pose them of the different panelists. Next slide. All right, so this is old hat for those of you who are regular viewers of our programming, but just quickly, for those of you who are new, California Forward leads a movement to make California's government and economy work for everyone. And we do that through really creating what we call an ecosystem of equity. So we start with the evidence, and you'll be seeing some of the data from the California Dream Index showing how we, by region, by ethnicity, by education and income, are doing on a variety of different issues that are critical for economic mobility and shared prosperity and equity. We make sure then to ground ourselves in the regional communities of the state, working with the members of the California Stewardship Network, who really help set our agenda and make sure that we're working on the priorities of the communities of California, not the priorities of the interest groups that are most active in Sacramento. We then come together through the California Economic Summit, and I sincerely hope that all of you are going to be able to join us this November 9th and 10th in person in Monterey for our coming together around a number of key pressing challenges for the state, including broadband, including housing affordability, including workforce development. And side note, just because I'm so excited about it, today we saw that the work that we did through the California Economic Summits, Forest Resilience, our Elevate Rural California, all the work that we've been doing to call the state to action around early investments and significant investments in forest management have really paid off. Today, the governor and legislature announced over $500 million in funding for forest management, directly responsive to the work that we and others have been doing through the California Economic Summit. So very excited about that. Today's about broadband, but some of you were here for our wildfire webinars, and hey, we do a webinar, the state spends $500 million. No, not exactly that way, but it's just so exciting to see this regional community work, to see this work of people coming together across parties, across sectors to make real change for the state actually happen. And we push this forward through the work of our California Forward Action Fund, which is our 501c4. So that is how we do what we do and why we do it. Next slide, Lauren. All right, so let's talk about broadband. Let me tee this up really quickly, and then we have a couple of fantastic presenters for you today, and then we'll move into questions. So we care about broadband for so many issues. The pandemic has obviously highlighted the situation, but it's a situation that was actually a crisis before the pandemic made it more apparent. And a big part of this is that there are tremendous racial and economic and geographic disparities. Here we're really highlighting the geographic disparities, where there are places where there is a very high level of broadband access, as shown within our California Dream Index, and there are areas that there are very low levels of broadband access. But keep in mind, this is just people saying, I have broadband access in my home. It doesn't mean that it's adequate. It doesn't mean that it's affordable. And so some of the data that was presented last week by Sunny Wright McPeak, the head of the California Emerging Technology Fund and our partner in this work for a long period of time, and John Chung, former state treasurer and controller and our co-chair, showed that there are huge barriers beyond just the availability of broadband to really make sure that it is ubiquitous, it is affordable, and people can actually access it. Next slide. And there are obviously differences across income levels. Although folks at lower levels of income in our society are in many ways in the most need of broadband to be able to access economic opportunity, to be able to access telemedicine, to be able to access all the things that you need to have really fulfill the California dream, they have lower levels of broadband access. So California Forward has been really active on these issues. We've been working on this through Elevate Rural California, through the California Economic Summit, with the partnership of Sunny Bright McPeak and Trish Kelly at Valley Vision, and so many of the other leaders that you'll be hearing from today and in this entire webinar series. So we were delighted at our Economic Summit in Fresno in 2019 that the governor announced his Broadband for All initiative. We were so happy to work with Amy Tong and Stephanie Tom and the rest of the folks in the administration to create the state's broadband action plan. And now is the time to do something significant. So just like the investments in forest management, we are pushing very, very hard for significant investments to really close the digital divide, doing that with all of our California Economic Summit partners, and recently issued a statement with a number of allies, the Association of Counties, the Hospital Association, CASBO, and others, calling for an $8 billion investment in broadband infrastructure for the state. We can do it now. We really have to do it now. All right, so let's get into our presentations for the day. Next slide, please. We're going to be talking about innovations in governance, right? So to get broadband right, you obviously need funding. Last week, we talked a lot about some of the innovations in funding, but you also need to get the governance right. Folks may remember our next presenter from his fantastic work in forest management. But today we've got you back, Cole. I had a fever, and prescription was more Colbell. So we brought you back here to talk about some of the cool stuff that you're doing out in the eastern part of the state around broadband. So what do you got for us today, man?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me again, Micah. Thank you, California Forward. And actually today I'm going to start with a cheap shot, so everyone starts with some nice endorphins and is smiling and is ready to hear from my presentation. And that's a smiling baby. So hopefully that gets you all very excited. That's my 8-week-old. He's surviving right now. So we're happy and we're good. I hope everyone else is doing good. My name is Cole Przybyla. I am, again, the Director of Innovation and Business Assistance in the County of Tuolumne. Next slide. So my job is essentially economic development, and really what I started going down the path of talking about broadband, talking about policies, was truly how do I encourage and attract and retain the businesses that are in Tuolumne County. And broadband just kept coming up as one of those key issues of access, and how are we going to allow businesses to do the work they need to do, let alone the fact that we just had a pandemic, and we're going to talk about some of the issues of connectivity at home. Next slide. And so immediately what became apparent is the average connectivity in the Central Sierra region. So this is across those 5 counties. And again, those 5 counties are Amador, Alpine, Calaveras, Tuolumne, Mariposa. And you can see that when I think of a millennial family like we are, and a business that needs to be connected, I think the minimum of 100 megabytes down per second. I'm hearing one echo. If there's potentially a panelist that still has their, Michael, do you mind muting yourself? And so the thing that I think is most important about this is you can tell that the vast majority of our Central Sierra region is 25 megabytes and down, meaning you can really only have a couple screens on at a time. And you saw during this pandemic that if you wanted to have a couple kids, yourself working, you're going to have connectivity issues. And I was on more than enough Zoom webinars where I saw this being a major issue that kept coming up. And I just wanted to give 2 quick stories. One on the business side and one on the home education side. And the one on the business side is, we see this as a huge issue of connectivity, because one of the things that happened is in Tuolumne County, we're going to have a new hospitality. They're going to have 100+ hotel room hotel come to Tuolumne County, and they want to have reliable access to internet, right? You're going to have guests that are coming from all over the world that probably want to work, probably want to watch TV, probably want to connect their devices. So you need a lot of capacity. Well, they're about 15 miles from Yosemite National Park, but they're also 8 miles away from a broadband fiber line. And so what we did was we get them connected to the internet service provider that has that fiber line. We have a conversation of what does it take to get from there to the 8 miles of fiber. Well, come to find out, it's $1 million a mile. And that is not a new number for me. That is a number that's come up a specific amount of times in Tuolumne County, $1 million a mile to put fiber line in. So that is pretty out of line or out of touch for a business, or out of reach for a business to actually get connected. And then the second story is mid-coronavirus, Tuolumne County administration is closed down. We're all, the office is closed except for administrative staff and a staggered administrative staff. I have to go in to drop off some papers and talk to my CAO. And one of the people that still is there is an administrative assistant that was answering phones to make sure that anyone who's calling in and having problems can reach someone. And she gets frustrated because there's a woman on the line that called in that was very mad, very upset. She couldn't get her 3 kids at home connected for education. Luckily, I was right around there, and I felt fairly confident because I had already been working with a couple internet service providers through our community college to get local students connected with some pretty good success. And so I talked to this woman. Next day, we actually had 2 internet service providers reach out to her to offer solutions. And in fact, one of those actually went out to her property literally that next day because of a conversation we had. But the story doesn't end happy. It actually ends that she could not get connected. And that was from multiple different angles. And in fact, one of them is a WISP. And even though she lives at the top of a hill, which is called Big Hill, literally way up above city of Sonora, there was enough trees and enough things that were in the way that we couldn't get her any reliable access. And I don't think anything has really actually come out of it. So a lot of stories to say that there is a lot of connectivity issues in the Central Sierra region. And next slide. And so what did I do, or how did I see that ways that I can get involved? So after a lot of this kind of initial research of looking into the data, reaching out to those that were smarter than me, like California Emerging Tech Fund, Valley Vision, Department of Technology, I realized that there is a lot of education missing on just understanding some of the terminology, some of the basics of what is broadband. Because you get county supervisors, you get departmental staff, you get those advocates in the community that say we need more connectivity, but there's not really an understanding of what that means. So I set about putting together a conference. And one of the things that I knew about conferences is that I needed a conference that was more of, less of come, listen, leave. I needed people to come, and I needed them to leave with a specific action. I wanted an outcome. And so I set about making sure that this conference had that outcome. And so how I did that is I set up a pre-conference, which was essentially a meeting with invited guests and then those that needed to register. And so the main event of the pre-conference was this idea of having supervisors getting educated on the topics that I learned, and specifically having the experts in the room with those supervisors to ask questions. So those were rural county representatives of California, California Emerging Tech Fund, Gladys was there, USDA Rural Development at the time, Director Kimberly Van, Department of Technology Director at the time, Stephanie Tom. They were all in one room with those 2 supervisors where we could offer and really suggest what were those outcomes that we wanted. And so I'll talk about those outcomes in a little bit. The second meeting that proved incredibly valuable, and that I suggest for anyone that's going to do something similar in the conference in this world, was this idea of the internet service providers getting to have a time to meet in person with a California Advanced Services Fund senior engineer. So I asked them to save a couple hours in the morning and meet 15 minutes with an internet service provider. And it was incredibly valuable for those internet service providers that already had an application in an Advanced Services Fund, had never heard of Advanced Services Fund money, or had some sort of problem at the county level, at the CPUC level, to actually have someone to talk to. And we had about 5 to 6 internet service providers meet with that senior engineer, and it had some amazing outcomes that were really exciting. So highly suggest that. The reason the pre-conference was so important was really, like I said, I wanted those actionable outcomes. So once we got to the main conference, where we had other federal, state, local, tribal, private internet service provider representation, 250 plus attendees, we knew where we were headed. We knew what I wanted them to leave with. And I say this because one of the things that I found very interesting, and next slide, is just the basics of education. And so this is one of the pieces I shared with supervisors, and shout out to Sonia at Conifer Communications for putting this piece together. Is just making it simple, right? Simple. Rural development, understanding that dial-up is essentially a cow path, whereas fixed wireless is getting to your county roads, where your fiber is the interstate. And I just loved this because it was just so simple to explain now. What is it that we want? Why do we want 100 megabytes per second as a minimum across a 5-county region specifically at one point, right? And why do we want fiber more than we want a WISP? Or why is a WISP better in some locations versus others? And even just describing a WISP, right? A wireless internet service provider. What is that? Some supervisors, they say we want connectivity, but how do we get connectivity, where, and how? And so the other thing I'd like to share about this at pre-conference is there was more. And if you're interested in some of those like easy terminology materials or any of the things that I'm going to be sharing today, please reach out. I'd be happy to share some of this materials, because it really did help the educational levels and get me to where I wanted to go with the outcomes. So let's talk about some of those pre-conference material, or the conference materials. So next slide. So this is the agenda in the conference that we had, which is essentially, I wanted the supervisors to come into this meeting feeling very confident that when Stephanie Tom and Director Kimberly Van suggested to an entire 250-person audience that we needed to start considering dig once policies and broadband plans, they knew exactly what I meant, what I wanted, and where we were headed. Because then later in the day was a presentation by Scenic. And Scenic was going to offer us a preferred scenario and start getting really heavy into data and terminology that a lot of the internet service providers in the room would understand. But I wanted those supervisors to be able to stand up and ask a question to Scenic, feeling very confident, knowing that, again, my outcome was I wanted a broadband roadmap across a 5-county region, dig once policies, and general consensus on where these 5 counties want to go with broadband. Next slide. That also meant I needed to educate some of the attendees that weren't internet service providers. So we put together these materials that people could read at the event. There are giant posters, but also little postcards. And this was super important because some of them were business owners in the crowd that might not know how many screens they need connected versus how much internet they need, right? So they know they have a connectivity issue sometimes. They may have access to it, but they just don't know how much speed they want. And so one of the things that I knew from some of my research is that I needed at my house 100 megabytes per second at minimum, right? Because I wanted 2 screens. I have 2 screens operating right now. I actually have a Zoom webinar for Yosemite Gateway Partners running right here. I have California Forward running right here. And I have my 3.5-year-old getting entertained with the screen out there because my 8-week-old is with my wife. So I knew as a young family, we needed some connectivity. And I also knew that there's a broadband middle mile fiber line 500 feet from my house. So I got connected. And I wanted everyone else to know. Next slide. The other thing is that there's a map, and I wanted everyone to understand what this map was, and that there, again, in other ways, data, maps, all different education materials, that there was a connectivity issue. Next slide. Finally, key takeaways. I wanted them to understand there's a preferred scenario. I wanted our 5 counties to all have a broadband dig once policy. I wanted the 5 counties to have a broadband roadmap, and I wanted cross-county coalition. Next slide. This preferred scenario, just for those that don't know, it's came out of Assembly Bill 1665, which is that 98% deployment across the state. And so the California Emerging Tech Fund encouraged the CPUC to work with CENIC, a lot of acronyms, to develop preferred scenarios to help regions and consortiums. Ours is Central Sierra Connect Consortium. Those are the 5 counties again. Those are our specific group meeting on broadband, where we needed to go. And just to kind of give you an idea, a preferred scenario is really how does the internet service providers find those funds? So like CAF, Advanced Services Fund, Reconnect, and now RDOF. And then how do they get unserved homes? And then also how do they streamline kind of getting to different assets? So next slide. This is the part that's really exciting. So essentially I put in a grant for $500,000 through the Economic Development Administration through the CARES Act last June, in hopes of saying this is what's going to make our community more resilient in the next pandemic. And our roadmap is going to do all of these things. It's going to do an asset correlation, which is exactly what this preferred scenario suggests, which is streamlining, understanding municipal, state, federal assets, right-of-ways. And it's going to also have policy recommendations. So we, all 5 counties, have talked about a trench policy already, but we left the dig once policy blank because we're not the experts in conduit or experts in what internet service providers need. So this roadmap will start to have that conversation with them on how do we work together. We're gonna have 5 priorities, meaning in each county, is it a residential neighborhood? Is it a last mile here? Is it a commercial zone? Because I think there's a conversation that the internet service providers need to be funding some of this infrastructure, but it also needs to be where we're kind of having the conversation next, which is a county municipal network. We're not going to be able to do that necessarily, but at least we can get project ready infrastructure ready, so that when we go to a federal grant location with money, we can say we already got this project ready and outlined. So that's what's going to do. And one of the most exciting parts of this is we outlined a component of money for a website and turning this document digital, so that literally an internet service provider in Sacramento or across the country can say, hey, I want to put in project from Mariposa County all the way up to Alpine, and how do I do that? And it's going to give them an XYZ of all the different permits, policies that they need to consider across the 5 counties. Hopefully they're the same, but also locations that will be available for different funding. So really, literally a roadmap. One last slide is what I suggest is communication. You really need to, if you're going to do it a regional base, get them along the line, get them all in a room, educate them, and then keep bringing them along. So we've been doing quarterly meetings with those supervisors that are interested. I know that a lot of times we start to have replacements. Like I just got replacements on my supervisory board. So what I suggest is you create a partnership with one of those supervisors you know is not the next term, that has at least some sort of knowledge in broadband or is your chair, and then ask them to invite a second supervisor. And this is important because if you want any action out of those meetings, and it is a private meeting, don't forget about the Brown Act and only 2 supervisors. If it's a public meeting, invite as many supervisors as you want. And then last thing is I would suggest keeping your state partners involved and inviting your federal partners, because the money, expertise, and the knowledge. And so that was my whirlwind of what we're up to. I think the most important part is education, and then headed towards this idea of a policy document that'll help bridge the gap between internet service providers and counties on understanding truly of what does it mean to have infrastructure come into a region. Last slide. This is my contact information. I love talking about broadband, natural resources, all county related, business, private, public partnerships. Please reach out to me. That's a cell phone. You're more than welcome to call or text. Thank you, Micah, for letting me have a whirlwind of explanation in broadband in our 5 county region.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the key thing here for me was ultimately we have a messy government system in California. And it is what it is. And as long as we do, that means that the job of people who are civic stewards like yourself is to do a lot of cat herding. And so I really took a lot away from your conversation about how do you get people on the same page? How do you make sure that they're educated? Because we go into, meetings with a lot of elected leaders that are making extraordinarily consequential decisions on these types of things. And they're like, well, what about satellites, right? And, you know, it's like, okay, well, let's loop back and talk about how that's not going to be a, you know, it's going to be a solution for some folks, but it's not going to have the speeds that we need for a lot of things. So we can't forget about fiber in these different areas. And so thank you for the work that you're doing out there.
Thank you, Micah.
Well, we are going to move across the state, as we often do, to the South Bay cities. And I'd like to bring up Jacki Bacharach to let us know what you've got going on down there in terms of innovations in broadband governance. Welcome, Jacki.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. I think we need the next slide. And the next slide. I am Jacki Bacharach. I'm the Executive Director of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, and I'm going to talk a little bit on a different platform of what we've done to actually get broadband up and working in the South Bay in Los Angeles County. If I can have the next slide, please. There are many, next slide, please. There are many South Bays in the state of California, and I call ours the real South Bay. We're in Los Angeles County, and if you're familiar with the county, LAX is on our northern end of the airport, and the Port of Los Angeles is on our southern end. We have, we're a great microcosm of the state. We have every ethnicity, every income, every geography. We go from the beaches to the inland. We have 15 cities. And our cities range from 2,000 people to 150,000 people. And together we're about 1 million people in Los Angeles County. So it's a sort of a microcosm and a good place to do to be a laboratory for urban experiments. And this surely was one that we took off with. Next slide, please. We had, it was very interesting. We were looking at Silicon Beach, and if you're familiar with LA County at all, you know that Santa Monica and Playa del Rey were attracting high-tech firms to come in, and we were very worried that as these firms moved south, which they seem to be doing, we weren't really ready with the high-speed fiber that they would need because these were high-technology firms. So we had a very, very serendipitous meeting with our Workforce Investment Board, and we have a great Workforce Investment Board in the South Bay. And we said to them, we think broadband is actually a business retention and attraction issue. And they jumped right on it and said, okay, you know, let's look at what we can do. In the middle of all of this, a business left Torrance, and that's our biggest city. And they said they left for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons they left had to do with the fact that they didn't have the network services that they needed. And so this really was exactly what we needed for the Workforce Investment Board to go off and get to use their funding, and they have funding in places that we don't have access to. And they got a funding for a study to do a needs assessment of what was happening in the South Bay. So next slide, please. And what they did, what happened was we used the money from the Workforce Investment Board to hire Magellan advisors who were really experts in the field. And because we're novices, I was sort of laughing when Micah said there might be people on the call that are novices, because we're not technical at all. We hired technical experts to help us. And Magellan advisors were those technical experts. And they did an analysis for us of what was happening in our cities. And what we found out is that many cities were actually purchasing a lot less bandwidth than they would need to future-proof themselves, for one thing, to go on the cloud, to do all these services that were going to be needed for servicing residents with more video, more other technical applications that they could use for more efficiency. We also found out that cities were paying way too much. They were getting less than a gigabit of service, very small amounts of service. And one of our cities was paying $6,000 a month, but the average was $4,000 a month. So this was like paying monopoly or retail rates. And we thought that was just excessive, and we could do better. And then we also recognized that the demand was going to increase every year, and that we really needed to do something about bringing better and more effective and more cost-effective internet to our area. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So what happened was we brought our IT directors and our public works directors in, and one of the first things we noticed was that many of our cities, the small cities, had somebody that was designated IT director but had no expertise. So everybody had a different level of knowledge in what we were trying to accomplish. And what Magellan Advisors came back with was they said, not only are you paying too much, but you haven't really been laying enough public fiber so that we can put together a public fiber network. It would be too expensive and take too long to do such a thing. So they said, let's go to the private sector. Let's see what we can do if we issue an RFP, and we'll find out what the private sector can bring to the table. During that time, while we were issuing the RFP, we did what Cole did. We had it in our own way. We had lunch and learns. We brought in experts who talked about cloud computing and different applications so that we could sort of bring our cities up to some understanding of why this was going to be important and needed for the future, if not for today. We received 4 proposals from our RFP. And one of them was exactly what we were looking for. We were very excited about it because it really addressed the kinds of things we were looking for. After that RFP was issued, we had a committee of our cities who unanimously selected American Dark Fiber. And American Dark Fiber, we signed an agreement with them, and then we had to work on funding. And I would like to say that the funding was one, I'm going to get to challenges, but funding was one of our big issues because there were 2 costs. And one cost was the cost of the monthly service. And that was a no-brainer for cities. Cities, as I said, were paying less than, over about $4,000 for less than a gigabit on average. And our proposer, American Dark Fiber, was offering us $1,000 a month for 1 gigabit. And up to $2,750, I think, for 10 gigabits. So it was scalable, 1, 2, or 10 gigabits, and it will even go to 100 when we get that capacity. But it is scalable up. The price was a no-brainer for every city. Every city was going to save money and was going to get much more internet service than they were currently getting. The nut that we had to crack was the cost of the construction, because and I can go on to, I guess let's go to the next slide. The next slide is actually what we created. What American Dark Fiber bid for us was a ring. And this is, if you can use your imagination, this is actually a ring which connects all of our city halls. And ours is a municipal network. We do what we're calling the middle mile. We go to city halls, and the ring was the connection. It's connected to 2 points of presence, data centers on the northern end. And the lines that you see going off the ring are the laterals that go to the city halls. Not only do we have city halls, but we made this available to the Workforce Investment Board, who was also paying very handsomely for very little service. We also have the Beach Cities Health District, which is a health prevention district. We have the Lundquist Institute, which is a biomedical research institute. West Basin Municipal Water District is also a member. So we opened it up to other members. And the cost, the way they did this is they took fiber that existed in the area. American Dark Fiber is leasing fiber from Edison or Crown Castle or whoever happens to be in the area. They did that to put together the ring. And the cost of construction was to fill in the gaps where fiber didn't exist, and also to create the laterals. So that cost turned out to be about $6 million. And that's where we had our next challenge. And I think you can go to the next slide where we talk about challenges. Okay, our biggest challenge in this entire thing was where we were going to get the $6 million, because the monthly cost was attracted to every city. What we did was, in Los Angeles County, we get money for transportation. And our subregion, the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, actually gets from Metro, our transportation agency, about $250 million over a period of 5 years or so that we can spend on transportation projects. We feel very strongly, and we have for a long time, that broadband is an essential component of our transportation system. Number one, we're strong advocates of telework way before COVID. And the trip not taken in Los Angeles County is an important congestion reliever. And so we felt for telework, this was really essential, but also for autonomous vehicles, for intelligent transportation systems, for signal synchronization, for next bus signs. All of these things can benefit from fiber. So we went to Metro and we said we wanted to spend part of our $250 million, about $6 million of that, in order to pay for this service. And Metro immediately said no. Metro staff said absolutely not. This is not a transportation expense. You have to remember this was in 2019, before COVID, before people were talking about broadband all the time. And they said no. And we said yes. And we submitted a list of pages and pages of transportation applications. We ended up having to go to our board members and asking our board members to help us, which they did. And we received approval from Metro to fully fund the entire construction. So for our members, it was free to join the ring and the service, and it was less monthly service than that's less monthly cost than they were getting for more service. So our first challenge was the money. Our second challenge was we had asked for $4 million because that's what we thought we needed. And, live and learn, we thought we were creating a service, broadband service, but it turns out there was really a lot of construction. So we had to, the first bid did not come in with prevailing wage. And of course we needed to add prevailing wage, and that bumped it up to $6 million. And so we were able to get that additional money from Metro, but that took a little bit extra time. Permitting is always called a challenge. For us, we said to our cities, and this was during COVID, by the way, we started construction in around 2020. We said, this is for you. When those people come to your desk, please help them with permits, because the faster we can get our ring done and our laterals built, the faster we can get this service up and running, and you could benefit. So permitting was only a challenge in that we had to, remind cities that they needed to address this in an expeditious way. Cole mentioned staff turnover and elected official turnover with the supervisors. And we had that same thing, over 4 years and all the things that happen in cities. We constantly had to, renew what this was all about with new staff members. And I think that's just general. And then COVID. And COVID, I would say, was a double-edged sword for us. Obviously, it did slow construction a little, but not really too much. We built the whole thing during the COVID period. But maybe it was more helpful on the other side, because if people didn't understand how effective and how important this was before COVID, they sure understood it during COVID and now. So we're very, we got it all done, and we started in 2016 and we finished and was up and running in August of 2020. And if I can have the next slide, please. We waited and waited and waited during COVID. Everybody expected it to be over. So we wanted to have a groundbreaking, or, like a ceremonial, let's lay a fiber. That didn't work. Finally, by November, we said, listen, we've got 27 sites are connected. We have to have a celebration. So we had a virtual celebration with our chair actually on site, flipping a ceremonial switch to signify that in August, we turned on the ring, the network. We had 27 sites connected and operational. And the core ring, just for statistics, is 98 miles approximately. 65% is aerial, 35% is underground. Our total is about 200 miles. All 15 cities were connected by January. And then all sites are going to be connected by this spring. Actually, May, I think, is the end of April is the last date for some of the other sites to be connected. So we got it done. People are using our network, and it's incredibly exciting. Next slide. Our next steps are really what's going to make this come alive, is how I say it. Applications. We want to work with cities now to develop what applications they need, what hardware, what software, storage of their cloud storage services, how we can help them by aggregating what they might need, putting it on the ring, and cities can share these things. So we're all connected. How do we make that connection work for better services for the constituents and for city operations. And that's what we're trying to do with our applications. And we're looking for innovations to address the digital divide in those communities. On collaborations, we're extremely excited to be looking at partnerships. We're having meetings with Beach Cities Health District and the Workforce Investment Board to talk about how we're going to take this middle mile and bring it closer. We know the state of California Broadband Council is talking about bringing broadband to every home. But before we can bring broadband to every home, we want to bring it to neighborhoods and create neighborhood centers where we can anchor those facilities with broadband services that will have telehealth, teleeducation, workforce development, and possibly other community services. And so we're looking at ways we can create these neighborhood centers that we also want to have as actually small mobility centers where we can bring people can walk to them, but they can also bring scooters and bikes and other things because they'll be in the neighborhood, and we can get broadband that close to people. And also, because it will be in a center, we can help them learn digital literacy. We can understand how they can take advantage of this network instead of having to try and figure it out at home. As far as expansion, we are trying to add middle mile connections. We're looking at other anchor institutions. We have another work order. We have a little money left, so we're going to add a regional communications center. One of our cities is adding 2 more buildings, and we're looking at private buildings and office parks so that we can bring more online and have more connectivity in the South Bay. Next slide. And then this is, of course, our essential, my crown jewel. I'm very excited about this. We applied for the American City and County Crown Communities Award for 2020. We were one of 6 winners in the United States, the only multi-jurisdictional winner. And if you're not familiar with the Crown Communities Awards, the awardees are judged on their uniqueness, their short and long-term value to the community, and effective innovative financing. So we're absolutely delighted and feel that this great project is being recognized and can only go up from here. We can only do more. So the next slide is my contact information, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. Yet another presentation on how does this actually get done in complicated California. So congratulations on everything you've been able to accomplish. I'm from the Bay Area, so I don't know if I can call it the real South Bay, but it's the beloved South Bay of the state of California. All right. Well, I'm actually quickly going to bring back up Cole Przybyla. I also need to clarify, because I had a frantic text exchange with my colleagues when I made the joke that apparently maybe only I got earlier about I have a fever and the only prescription is more Colbell. That I don't have COVID, I'm fine. It was in the joke about that Saturday Night Live skit with Will Ferrell. But in any case, I probably should have used it now because we are getting more Colbell because you have an exciting announcement that I guess happened in the course of this time. What's going on, Cole?
Well, it looks like California, Florida's done it again. So thanks for having a presentation. Another reason presentations work, I guess. I just got my announcement literally the moment I stopped presenting that the U.S. Commerce and Economic Development Administration has approved the $500,000. So we got our allocation. So we're going to start moving on our broadband roadmap, hopefully tomorrow.
Awesome. Congratulations, Cole. And let that be a lesson to all of you. Participate in California Forward webinars. Awesome.
Exactly.
Okay. So I'd like to bring up for our question and answer period, one of the leaders of our Ensuring Broadband for All working group of the California Economic Summit. So next slide, please, Lauren. And that is Eduardo Gonzalez, who is the Interim Executive Director of the Office of Community and Economic Development at the California State University of Fresno. So Eduardo, good to see you. Thank you so much for leading our work. And right before we get into the questions, I wanted to answer a quick technical question about the California Dream Index. We were asked whether those data that we were showing are data on individuals or households that have access. and those data from the American Community Survey are households. And there was a question about, does this count homeless folks and homeless households? And the answer is, it tries to, but not especially well. So to the extent that we have a large and growing homeless population in California, we're probably undercounting the number of people that have challenges accessing broadband. So now I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for leading our work and being a part of this webinar today, Eduardo.
Perfect. Thank you, Micah, and thank you, the panelists. Cole, congratulations on that amazing award. One of the questions was specifically on that, was where was that money coming from? And you just mentioned, which is EDA. Do you want to specify what type of grant? Was that a technical assistance grant, or I'll let you answer.
So I applied for in June. I saw this as a potential opportunity for two reasons, actually, is because it was through the CARES Act. So it was actually, if you remember, the first round of funding because of the coronavirus. And one of the things that they put in there is that they were, if you showed enough economic hardship, and obviously during the coronavirus, we were having a true amount of economic hardship in county levels, that it would be a no match. So one of the more exciting parts about all of this, as much as it's getting $500,000, it's a $500,000 no match grant. So we have a lot of exciting work to be done with that. And yeah, it's through the Economic Development Administration. And I think it's technically a technical assistant grant. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Cole. And then there's a couple other questions for you, Cole. The 1 million per mile for fiber, was that for new trenching, conduit? Was that fiber to the new poles or existing poles, or what was that for?
So we don't have a whole lot of poles out. When you start getting towards the last mile and out away from the cities, most of our fiber is trenched. And so this would have been a new trenched along the road. And in fact, it would have been Highway 120. So it would have been a trenched 120 highway, new fiber. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then we do have another question from Christine Crawford. She's working with her ISPs in her county, and she's struggling to find any ISPs who are willing to submit any grant applications. Any suggestions from the expert now, because you are the expert?
I've found success setting up the direct meeting. And again, I think it always comes back to education. So let's give two stories. So there was one where an internet service provider didn't even know about advanced services funds. So I brought them the material, the map, the opportunity, and how to apply. So essentially the map, the website, and some just collateral. And I sat down and had a conversation with the internet service provider, and then said, look, I'll do the legwork for you, set up the meeting, get the senior engineer there. And that's where we started to get some more traction. I think the problem is sometimes we get the advanced services fund money, and then there's a lot of process to be done still, which is CEQA, NEPA, depending on where you're at. And so in county development department level. So that's where I think you get some of the pushback from internet service providers, is that there is still that investment that they're getting from the state, but there's still a lot of business investment that needs to be done as well. So I think it has to go back to education and getting them a clear connection with advanced services funds on truly what's available and what's the opportunity.
Perfect, thank you. And we do have one last question for you, Cole. So now that you have the funding, what are you doing next now? Just kidding. So now that you have the funding, who will be doing your preferred scenario?
So our preferred scenario is done. I actually got that completed just right after the conference, and Scenic did that. I'm trying to, I don't want to mess up on their acronym, so just allow me a second to pull it up. Scenic.org is their website, and it is, I apologize, I can't ever remember their entire acronym, but they help connect school districts, and I would just have you look up Scenic. So they're the ones that did the preferred scenario. And even more, if you want to get connected with California Emerging Tech Fund or Gladys, that's who I use to kind of get in connection and make that preferred scenario happen. If you send me an email, I'll make sure that if you're interested, the person that I did ask that question, I'll get you connected to the right people.
If someone wanted to review that preferred scenario, is that available to the public?
I believe so. I believe that I have it, and then Scenic is also have it, and I'm pretty sure it's a public document. I don't know the specific answer to that, but I'm sure it is.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cole. There's a
And
couple.
Gladys' email is right. Looks like they just got posted in the chat.
Yes.
If you're interested in a preferred scenario for your consortium, talk to Gladys. She's an outstanding resource.
Perfect. And there is a couple of questions for Jackie. Jackie, on the Magellan study, is that available for the public as well?
Yes, the Magellan study's up on our website, which is southbaycities.org.
Okay. And then the other question from Carl is, how much did the South Bay Fiber Network cost per mile?
Well, it was the total is 200 miles, and we're paying about $6 million.
Okay.
So I didn't, you guys can do the math.
There you go. And then are school districts and county office of education connected to that ring?
No, we actually met with Scenic as well, which connects a lot of the school districts, and they have their own network, and we can cooperate, but it was they were going to charge us something that was more than we really wanted to pay, and so we didn't follow through with that, but we do have connections that we can pursue in the future.
Okay, perfect. And those are connected obviously because they're anchor institutions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then we have another question. Who owns and operates the middle mile, and who will be doing last mile, the traditional ISPs or others?
Okay, well, the network is owned by American Dark Fiber. It is a private network working with municipalities like us, the South Bay Cities Council of Governments. And so we work with them. We have a very close working relationship, and we have a contract which controls the rates, so they cannot just raise rates out of hand. We use Magellan advisors still to do our construction management and to do a lot of negotiation because they are the experts and have the technical expertise. And in the future, we want to be working with cities on other funding sources to bring it to their businesses, to bring it to their and to their homes if they want to. City of Manhattan Beach looked at possibly bringing it to their homes. City of Torrance is looking at bringing it to their businesses. And American Dark Fiber has talked to us very briefly about coming up with a special funding option that would make it actually attractive for businesses to join in. So we're working on that now.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. And then one last question for you is Caltrans, have they been very helpful in sharing conduit and fiber or assets of where they're at?
That's actually something I probably can't answer because American Dark Fiber, it went off and got the fiber and the conduits, and we didn't deal directly with any of those that had it. We're on state highways in some places, I'm sure. So, but I don't know if we used Caltrans fiber or not. We are connected to Metro now, though. And when we got the money, I neglected to say that during my presentation. When we got the money from Metro, the one condition that they made was that we connect to Metro and work with them on real-time traffic information. And of course, we were delighted and are very, very happy to be connected to Metro and work on future transportation applications.
Perfect. Thank you, Jackie. And I do want to make one last comment. Cole mentioned that CTF has funded Scenic for the preferred scenario. They've also funded our regional consortia in our area for preferred scenarios and several others. And those are available to the public if anyone wants copies of those. So I think that was our last question, and I'll send it over back to Micah.
Sure. Actually, Eduardo, let me ask a question of you, right? So when you heard about what's going on over in Tuolumne County, when you heard about what's going on down in the South Bay, how does that compare to what you've been having happen in your neck of the woods? Are there some kind of takeaways that are very similar to what your experience is, or some of the things that are different or surprised you?
Yeah, so one of the key things that Cole mentioned and Jackie both mentioned is that the takeaway is hosting those lunch and learn less sessions and those broadband conferences with your local, state, and federal stakeholders. So Cole, who hosted this broadband conference, we were aware of that. We actually learned lots of that. And so we were able to convene some of our local, state, and federal folks here locally. So that's the reason CETF came over and said, well, we will fund your preferred scenario as well. And so we're a little behind from Cole's strategies, but we're learning. And I think that's the key thing, is learning from best practices from local partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's what the California Economic Summit is all about, bringing people together across regions. That's what the California Stewardship Network is all about. So thank you, Eduardo, for being a leader of that work. Thank you to Cole. Thank you to Jacki for a couple of extraordinarily practical and engaging presentations. Really enjoyed this webinar. And we got another one. We got one more, folks. Third time is going to also be a charm. So we're looking in particular at broadband provider innovations next week to complement the last couple of sessions. So I hope you'll join us, but also please join California Forward, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and Valley Vision on May 14th as we present the new Getting Connected, a broadband deployment and adoption resource guide for local and regional government leaders. This resource guide provides detailed information and resources on innovation policies and practices to accelerate broadband investment in your communities, highlighting many of the examples in the innovation series, but many more from across the state and nationally. CETF and USC will also be presenting new information from their 2021 statewide broadband adoption survey, including on health and education. So you want broadband content, we have broadband content, and hopefully we'll have some good announcements to make soon about the state's investment in broadband infrastructure, as well as the really wonderful announcements today about the state's investment in forest management. So that's it for us today. Hope to see everybody next Thursday. Thanks to the presenters, thanks to CETF and our other partners, and we will see you soon.